They hurt you, and your nervous system immediately wants to fix it. You want answers, reassurance, a confession, a promise, anything that makes the pain stop. That is the exact moment most people lose their power, because they start talking from the wound. They send long paragraphs. They explain their feelings perfectly. They point out every detail. They ask why. They beg for clarity. They demand an apology. They try to force an emotionally mature conversation right now. And to an avoidant, that intensity feels like pressure, like a trap, like a demand they cannot meet, so they withdraw even more. Not because you were wrong to feel, but because your reaction becomes predictable. They learn that hurting you equals getting a flood of attention. They learn that distance makes you chase. They learn that silence makes you perform. That is why the first move is not revenge, not playing hard to get, not pretending you don't care. It is control. It is regulation. It is you refusing to let your pain write the next message. Going quiet for 24 to 72 hours is not about punishing them. It is about stopping the emotional bleeding. It is you stepping out of the cycle, where you explain yourself into smaller and smaller pieces, hoping they finally understand. You don't do this to make them miss you. You do it to make you safe again. Because when you speak while you're activated, you don't communicate, you negotiate your dignity. You offer extra chances you didn't mean to offer. You accept excuses you wouldn't accept tomorrow. You say things that teach them you can be pushed, and then pulled back with half effort. Silence in those first days is power, because it removes the reward. The avoidant expects the chase, expects the emotional storm, expects you to keep the connection alive, even while they damage it. When you go quiet, you interrupt the script. Suddenly, they are left with the weight of what they did, without you softening it, without you filling the space, without you making it easier for them to avoid accountability. They don't get to hide behind your paragraphs. They don't get to turn it into a debate. They don't get to call you too much and make your feelings the problem. You simply stop. You step back. You breathe. You return to yourself. And in that quiet, something important happens inside you. Your body settles. Your mind clears. You separate facts from fear. You start hearing your own standards again. You remember that love is not supposed to feel like a guessing game. You remember that being hurt is already enough. You don't need to chase the person holding the knife to explain why it cut you. You begin to choose what kind of conversation you're willing to have, and what kind of relationship you're willing to build, instead of reacting to whatever mood they're in. This quiet also protects your self-respect, because the truth is, the more you talk when someone is avoiding, the more you hand them control. They control your sleep, your appetite, your mood, your worth, your attention. They become the center. Silence takes the center back. It says, I will not abandon myself to keep access to you. I will not reward inconsistency with more intimacy. I will not chase closure from someone who created the chaos. When you return after those 24 to 72 hours, you return with strength, not desperation. You can say one clean line, calm, simple, undeniable. I'm taking space because that wasn't okay with me. I'm open to talking when we can communicate respectfully. I don't do relationships where I'm left confused and hurt. No begging. No explaining your entire childhood. No proving you are lovable. Just standards. Just clarity. Just grounded energy. That is what confuses them. Not silence itself, but the message behind it. You are no longer predictable. You are no longer easy to pull back with crumbs. You are no longer negotiating with pain. You are leading with self-control, and self-control is the language of power. When an avoidant hurts you, your instinct is to make them understand. You want to paint the full picture so clearly that even a person who avoids emotions can finally feel the impact. So you write long messages, you break down the timeline, you explain your intentions, you clarify what you meant, you defend your character, you list examples from the past. You try to prove you are not too sensitive. You try to prove your pain is logical. But this is where the trap lies. Because the more words you give an avoidant in a tense moment, the more escape routes you hand them. They can pick one sentence and argue it. They can focus on your tone instead of their behavior. They can say, "You're overreacting? You're twisting my words. You always make it a big deal." And suddenly you are in a courtroom, fighting for the right to be respected. That's why the second move is short, calm, and factual. Not rude, not robotic, controlled. Because control is the one thing they don't expect from someone who's hurt. They expect emotion. They expect intensity. They expect you to chase clarity like a starving person chases bread. When you respond in a few simple lines, you cut the oxygen to their favorite strategies: deflection, debate, and delay. You don't give them a long emotional rope to wrap around your neck. A short response is powerful because it's harder to distort. It's harder to twist. It's harder to dismiss without looking guilty. A paragraph can be edited in their mind. A clean sentence stands like a wall. "That wasn't okay with me. I don't accept being spoken to like that. I'm not available for hot and cold behavior." These lines are not attacks. They are boundaries. They describe reality without pleading. They don't beg for empathy. They require basic respect. This is where most people misunderstand power. They think power is showing how deeply you feel, how loyal you are, how much you can endure, how hard you're willing to fight for the connection. But to an avoidant, emotional intensity can be seen as pressure, and pressure triggers distance. So the real power is not more emotion. The real power is emotional discipline. You can feel everything inside, but you choose to communicate from your standards, not from your panic. Short and factual also shows self-worth. Because self-worth doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It doesn't chase, it states. If someone has to be persuaded to treat you well, that relationship is already off balance. When you respond briefly, you send a message without saying it out loud. I don't need to perform for basic decency. I don't need to write essays to earn common respect. I don't need to explain myself into being valued. And that is exactly what confuses them. Because they are used to people functioning for them emotionally while they underfunction. This move also protects you from emotional hangovers. Long messages often lead to regret. You reread them later and think, why did I reveal so much? Why did I sound desperate? Why did I give them so much access to my heart while they were careless with it? A short response keeps your dignity intact. It reduces the chance you'll be pulled into a spiral of reactive texting, where each message is a response to the last wound they triggered. The key is the tone. Calm doesn't mean weak. Calm means you are not easily moved. Calm means you can hold your ground without raising your voice. Calm means you are not trying to punish them. You are trying to protect yourself. And factual means you stay on behavior, not personality. You don't say, "You're cruel." You say, "You canceled last minute again, and that doesn't work for me." You don't say, "You don't care." You say, "When you disappear after conflict, trust breaks for me." You don't argue about their intentions. You deal with their actions. Then you stop. That's the part people skip. They send the clean line. Then they send another, and another, trying to make the first line land. But power is the full stop. Power is allowing your words to sit there like a mirror they can't look away from. Because when you don't over-explain, you force them to face the message instead of getting lost in the noise. When an avoidant hurts you, your pain naturally wants to name the villain. Your nervous system wants a label, because labels feel like safety. You're selfish. You're cold. You're toxic. You never cared. It makes sense because when you're wounded, your brain tries to simplify the threat so you can protect yourself. But the problem is, character attacks don't create clarity, they create a shield. And avoidants are experts at shields. The moment you attack who they are, they stop hearing what they did. They don't lean in and reflect, they lean back and defend. Even if you're right, the delivery becomes the escape route. That is why the third move is surgical. You name the behavior, not their identity. You point to the action, the pattern, the moment, the impact. Because behavior is undeniable, and identity is debatable. If you say, "You're a liar," they can argue all day about being a liar. They can list the times they told the truth. They can play the victim. They can make your wording the issue. But if you say, "You told me you'd call, then you disappeared for 2 days," there's nothing to debate. It's either true or it isn't. And if it is true, it puts responsibility right where it belongs. This is not about being polite. This is about being effective. Avoidants often survive emotionally by detaching from shame. When you attack their character, you trigger shame, and they respond with distance, dismissal, anger, or cold logic. They'll say, "You're dramatic. You're too much. You're making problems." Because if they can make you the problem, they don't have to face their behavior. But when you name the behavior calmly, you remove their favorite trick, turning it into a debate about your personality. Naming behavior also protects your dignity. Because character attacks are often your pain, trying to get power back. It's the wound trying to wound. And afterward, you don't feel strong, you feel empty. You feel like you lost yourself. You feel like you became someone you don't even respect. Behavior-based language keeps you aligned with who you want to be. Firm, clear, self-respecting, not cruel. You can be emotionally honest without becoming emotionally reckless. There's also a deeper reason this move works. Healthy relationships are built on repair, and repair requires specific information. "You're terrible" gives no map for repair. It only gives blame. But when you shut down and ignore me after conflict, "I feel unsafe and I lose trust" is a map. It tells them exactly what breaks the bond. It also tells you something important. If they continue the behavior, you have your answer. You're not judging their soul, you're watching their patterns. This move changes the entire power dynamic. Instead of chasing their approval, you're stating your reality. Instead of begging them to care, you're measuring their capacity. And instead of trying to force closeness, you're protecting your standards. The avoidant gets confused because they're used to people either exploding emotionally or shrinking into silence with resentment. Calmly naming behavior is neither. It is clean. It is adult. It is grounded. Here are examples that hit hard without becoming personal attacks. When you cancel plans last minute, it tells me I'm not being prioritized. When you flirt with other people and call it harmless, it disrespects the relationship. When you say something hurtful and then act like nothing happened, it breaks emotional safety. When you pull away instead of talking, it creates distance that I won't keep chasing. These lines don't insult them, but they also don't soften the truth. And notice what you're doing here. You're not arguing about their intention. Avoidants love hiding behind intention. "I didn't mean it. I was stressed. I didn't think it was a big deal." Intention is invisible. Behavior is visible. Impact is real. So you anchor the conversation in what can be seen and what can be felt, not what can be excused. When you name the behavior, you also stop giving them the fantasy that you can be managed with mood swings. You become a person with standards, not a person with reactions. You become someone who doesn't need to punish to be powerful, because clarity is power. And that's when the relationship stops being about whether they choose you and starts being about whether their behavior qualifies for access to you. When an avoidant hurts you, most people set boundaries the wrong way. They set them like a plea, like a wish, like a protest. "Please don't do this again. Promise you won't disappear. I need you to change." But a boundary is not a request for their personality to become safer overnight. A boundary is a line that protects your peace, and it only becomes real when it has a consequence you can actually control. Not a threat, not a punishment, not a dramatic ultimatum, but a clear decision about what you will do if the pattern repeats. Because here is the painful truth. An avoidant can listen to your emotions and still keep the same behavior. They can say, sorry, and still vanish next week. They can hold your hand and still keep you in uncertainty. If your boundary is only words, it becomes a suggestion, and suggestions get ignored by people who are comfortable with distance. So your job is not to become louder. Your job is to become clearer, and then become consistent. A controlled consequence is power, because it ends the cycle of you chasing their accountability. You stop trying to manage them, and you start managing access to you. That shift is everything. It moves you from, how do I make them act right? To, what happens in my life when someone acts wrong? That is the mindset of self-respect. That is the mindset of someone who has decided their nervous system matters more than someone else's comfort. A real boundary has 3 parts: the behavior, the standard, and the consequence. Behavior. What happened? Standard, what you require. Consequence, what you will do if it continues. Simple, calm, direct. When you shut down and disappear during conflict, I can't build trust. I need consistent communication. If it happens again, I will take space and step back from this connection. Notice what's missing, begging. Notice what's missing, rage. You are not trying to scare them into loving you. You are choosing what you will participate in. This confuses an avoidant, because they are used to 2 extremes: people who explode and then forgive, or people who suffer quietly and stay. A calm consequence breaks both. It shows you are not here to perform emotions for attention, and you are not here to tolerate confusion for love. You're not saying, I'll leave forever, in a dramatic moment. You're saying, if the pattern continues, my access changes. That is clean. That is adult. That is terrifying to someone who survives by keeping relationships vague. And the consequence must be something you can control. Not, if you do this again you'll regret it. Not, then you'll see what you lost. Not, I'll make you jealous. That's not a boundary, that's a power struggle. The safest consequences are behavioral, practical, and measurable. I won't continue conversations when I'm being disrespected. If you cancel last minute again, I'll stop making plans that require me to rearrange my day. If you disappear without explanation, I'll assume you're not available for a relationship and I'll move forward. These are not punishments. These are self-protection policies. Here is why this matters so much. Without consequences, your boundaries teach them that your limits are flexible. They learn that you will say, this hurts, and still stay. They learn that you will cry and still answer their late night texts. They learn that you will forgive without repair. And then you start feeling smaller, not because they're powerful, but because you keep abandoning yourself. The consequence is you keeping your promise to you. This is also how you stop repeating the same conversation. Because repeating boundaries without consequences trains them to delay change. They think, they'll be upset, they'll talk, I'll disappear, then they'll come back. But when your consequence is consistent, the pattern loses its reward. Not because you're trying to control them, but because you're no longer available to be controlled by inconsistency. Deliver it once, calmly, and then let your actions speak. If it happens again, you don't send a new speech, you don't argue. You don't negotiate. You simply do what you said you would do. You step back, you take space, you remove access. You protect your peace. And in that moment, you stop being someone who hopes for respect, and you become someone who requires it. When an avoidant hurts you, something inside you starts bargaining. You start thinking, if I explain better, love harder, stay softer, stay available, stay understanding, they will finally see me. And that's the moment you accidentally teach them the worst lesson. That your loyalty is endless, even when your peace is not protected. You start proving your worth like it's on trial. You show up faster. You reply longer. You forgive quicker. You give access to your attention, your body, your time, your comfort. While they give you uncertainty, distance, and half effort. And the more you prove, the less you're valued, because people don't respect what they don't have to earn. This fifth move is simple, but it's the one that changes everything. You stop proving. You remove access, not to punish them, not to make them jealous, not to play mind games, but because love without safety is not love. It's a nervous system addiction. Removing access means your energy is no longer available for someone who treats your heart like it's optional. It means you stop rewarding inconsistency with intimacy. Avoidants often feel most comfortable when you are always there, always open, always waiting. It lets them keep control without committing to emotional responsibility. If you're always available, they can disappear and return whenever they feel ready, with no cost. So when you remove access, you break the pattern at its core. You stop being the soft landing place for behavior that never improves. You stop being the emotional nurse for someone who keeps injuring you. Removing access looks like this. You don't respond instantly just because they finally texted. You don't drop your plans because they're suddenly lonely. You don't jump into late night calls that reset the bond without any repair. You don't keep giving girlfriend or boyfriend energy to someone who keeps you in confusion. You don't keep providing comfort while they avoid accountability. Access is not just physical, it's emotional. It's the privilege of reaching you, influencing you, being held by you, being heard by you. And here is why it confuses them. They expect you to chase the moment they withdraw. They expect your anxiety to do the work for their silence. They expect you to soften the consequences of their behavior with your love. When you remove access, you become unfamiliar. You become stable. You become harder to manipulate, not because you're cold, but because you are no longer easy to pull with a string. They feel the shift because for the first time, your attention is not guaranteed. The key is that you remove access without drama. Drama keeps them powerful, because then the story becomes, you're emotional, instead of, I'm inconsistent. Quiet boundaries are terrifying to people who survive by keeping everything vague. You don't need speeches. You need standards. You can say one line and mean it. I'm taking space. I'm not available for this dynamic. If we're going to continue, it needs consistency and respect. Then you live your life like you meant it. This move also heals you, because proving your worth is exhausting. It trains your brain to believe love must be earned through suffering. It turns connection into performance. Removing access interrupts that belief. It tells your nervous system, I do not have to beg to be treated well. I do not have to chase to be chosen. I do not have to shrink my needs to keep someone near. Yourself. Worth stops being a concept and becomes a behavior. And here's the hardest truth. If someone only shows up when they feel you slipping away, that is not love, that is control. So when you remove access, you also reveal reality. Either they rise to meet a healthier standard, or they fade because they were only there for convenience. Either way, you win, because you stop feeding a bond that feeds on your self-abandonment. You are not removing access to make them suffer. You are removing access to stop yourself from suffering. You are closing the door to crumbs, so you don't keep calling it a meal.